My name is Margot Hayes, and I am 66 years old. I never thought I would be sitting here confessing the darkest truth of my life to strangers on the internet. But sometimes the pain inside you grows so heavy that silence becomes unbearable. You need someone to listen, even if those ears belong to people you will never meet. The day of my husband's funeral was the quietest, emptiest day of my existence. Ernest had been my partner for 42 years, my anchor, my safety, my best friend. I had built my entire life around his presence. To stand by his grave dressed in black, feeling the cold earth under my feet, was like watching my soul being lowered into that casket with him. I remember clutching the edge of the coffin as if holding on to him for one last time, my hands trembling uncontrollably. Our sons Charles and Henry stood beside me. But instead of grief, I saw something else on their faces, something cold, detached. Their tears looked forced. Their embraces felt staged, like actors performing a role they didn't believe in. And as I tried to hold myself together, my phone buzzed in my purse. When I saw the screen, my blood froze. An unknown number, a message. "I'm alive, that's not me in the casket." For a moment, I thought grief had broken my mind. My heart raced so violently I thought I might collapse. With trembling fingers, I replied, "Who are you?" The response came almost instantly. "I can't say. They're watching. Don't trust our sons." I nearly dropped the phone. The world around me spun. My sons. The same boys I had carried in my arms, fed from my hands, kissed goodnight every single day of their childhood. The same boys I sacrificed everything for. I turned my eyes to Charles and Henry, searching for answers in their calm, practiced expressions. Nothing. Only a hollow chill that ran through my bones. That moment cracked my reality open. I couldn't breathe. My husband was gone, or was he? My sons were grieving, or were they? Nothing made sense. Nothing felt safe anymore. I met Ernest when I was 24 years old in our small town of Spring Creek. I still remember it as if it were yesterday. I was walking toward the market in my faded green dress and scuffed shoes, carrying a basket I could barely afford to fill. Ernest stepped out of his bicycle repair shop with grease-stained hands and gave me a shy smile that changed my life. "Good morning, Margot," he said softly. "Need me to check your bike?" I didn't even own a bike, but I made up some excuse just to keep him talking. That little lie turned into conversations under the big oak tree in Town Square Park, then promises of eternal love, then a wedding so simple it looked almost poor to outsiders. But it was rich with joy. The first years of our marriage were humble. We lived in a tiny two-bedroom house with a tin roof that leaked whenever it rained. We would set out pots and pans across the floor to catch the drips, laughing together as water tapped like music around us. Ernest worked sunup to sundown in the shop while I sewed clothes to earn a few dollars for groceries. We didn't have much, but what we did have was real love that no amount of money could ever buy. When Charles was born, I thought my heart would burst. He was beautiful, his father's big brown eyes, my crooked little smile. 2 years later, Henry arrived, just as perfect, and I believed my world was complete. Ernest was the kind of father you read about in fairy tales. He taught them how to fish in the river on Sundays, how to fix things with their hands, how to respect honesty and hard work. I gave them everything, my time, my energy, my very body, so that they would never know the hunger or shame I had felt as a child. But as they grew older, the love I poured into them seemed to slip through their fingers like sand. Charles especially was ambitious. From the time he was a teenager, he would look at our peeling paint and rusty car and ask why we lived like this, as if modesty were a disease. Henry, quieter, but always following his brother's lead, began to echo the same discontent. When Charles turned 18, Ernest offered him a place at the shop. Charles laughed in his father's face. "I don't want to get my hands dirty like you, Dad. I'm going to be someone important." I still remember the way Ernest sat on the porch that night, staring at the stars, silent. I knew his heart had broken. Years passed. Our boys became men of the city, sharp suits, luxury cars, endless conversations about real estate and investments. At first, I felt proud. My children had built a life far beyond what Ernest and I could give them. But soon, that pride curdled into something bitter. Their visits grew short, their calls colder. When they did come home, it was with looks of pity, as though Ernest and I were embarrassing relics. Then came Jasmine, Charles's wife, a woman whose disdain for us was written in every gesture, every word she spoke through painted lips. She sat in our kitchen, her red dress worth more than everything I owned, picking at the food I had cooked with love, whispering to Charles that next time they should take us to a restaurant so it wouldn't be so awkward. Little by little, our family bonds unraveled. Ernest would say to me in quiet moments, "Margot, money has changed our boys. We aren't enough for them anymore." I refused to believe it. I told myself they were busy, they'd come back around, they still loved us. But deep inside, I knew he was right. And yet nothing could have prepared me for what was to come. I wanted to believe that distance, not malice, had carved a wall between us and our sons. But the truth revealed itself slowly, like a poison spreading through the veins of our family. It began with subtle suggestions, Charles urging us to sell the house, Henry hinting that Ernest should retire from the shop. "It's for your safety, Dad," Henry said one night at dinner, his voice dripping with concern that felt rehearsed. "You could get hurt. An accident at your age could be fatal." Ernest looked at him with sadness so deep it silenced me. Later, in the quiet of our bedroom, he whispered, "Margot, they're not just impatient. There's something darker behind all this." I brushed it off at the time. How could I ever suspect my own children of harm? The pressure grew relentless. Charles brought papers one evening, legal documents already filled in, waiting for our signatures. "This house is barely worth anything," he explained with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "But if we sell it now, I can add some money so you and Mom can move somewhere better." Somewhere better. To him, better meant stripping us of the only place we had ever called home. The walls where our children had taken their first steps, where Ernest and I had built our entire lives, reduced to numbers on a page. We refused, of course. Ernest's voice shook as he told them, "This house is ours. We'll leave it when we die, not before." But our sons didn't relent. Their visits became battles, their words sharpened into knives, cloaked in false affection. Jasmine even suggested a retirement community, once smiling sweetly, as if she were doing me a favor. "It would be more comfortable for people your age," she said. I felt her words like a slap across the face. To her and to my sons, we were no longer parents. We were burdens, problems to be managed. Then came the accident, or what I thought was an accident. It was a Tuesday morning, and I was in the kitchen preparing Ernest's favorite lunch when the phone rang. A voice I didn't recognize delivered the words that shattered me. "Your husband has been in a serious accident. You need to come immediately." The world blurred. My neighbor Doris drove me to the hospital because my hands shook so badly I couldn't hold the keys. When I arrived, Charles and Henry were already there. That detail didn't strike me until later. How could they have known before me I was Ernest's emergency contact? No one else should have been notified. But in my desperation, I didn't question it. Charles hugged me tightly. "Dad is in bad shape," he said gravely. "The doctors say one of the machines at the shop exploded. He has severe burns and head trauma." Henry's eyes were red, but his expression was wrong. He looked nervous, not devastated, like a man waiting for news about a business deal rather than standing at his father's deathbed. When I finally saw Ernest, my knees buckled. He was hooked to machines, his face wrapped in bandages, his breathing mechanical. I took his hand. His strong, calloused hand, the same one that had built bicycles, held our children, caressed my cheek for 4 decades. "I'm here, Ernest," I whispered. "You're going to be okay. You always fight your way back to me." And I swear in that moment he squeezed my hand. His eyelids fluttered as though he was trying to tell me something, to warn me. The nurses dismissed it as an involuntary spasm, but I knew better. Ernest was fighting. He was trying to reach me from the edge of death. For 3 endless days I lived in the hospital waiting room. I barely slept, barely ate. My sons, instead of comforting me, spent their time whispering to doctors, asking about insurance policies and medical bills. On the second day, Charles sat me down. "Mom, we reviewed Dad's insurance. He has a life policy for $50,000 plus workers' comp. You'll be taken care of." I remember staring at him in disbelief. My husband was still alive, barely, but alive, and Charles was already talking about money. I snapped at him. I don't care about the money. I just want him to get better. He nodded, pretending to agree, but his eyes betrayed him. They were calculating cold. On the third day, the doctors gathered us. Their words fell like stones. Ernest's burns were infected, the brain trauma, irreversible. They suggested letting him go. I cried, begged, demanded they try everything. But my sons exchanged a glance that cut me to the bone. Charles spoke softly, almost tenderly. Mom, Dad wouldn't want to live like this. He always said he never wanted to be a burden. A burden. That word ignited something inside me. I exploded. He's your father, not a burden. But they didn't flinch. They spoke of quality of life, of practical decisions. And in the early hours of Friday morning, my Ernest was gone. Declared dead at 4:37 a.m. I clung to his body, sobbing, unwilling to let go. But my sons were prepared. Too prepared. Within an hour, they had funeral arrangements, made insurance claims, filed documents ready, as if they had been waiting for this moment. The funeral came swiftly, rushed cold. Only a handful of people attended. Ernest deserved more neighbors, friends, the community he had loved. Instead, it was quiet, empty, orchestrated by Charles to be over as quickly as possible. And then, standing at his grave broken, I received that message. I'm alive, that's not me in the casket. My whole world tilted. My heart told me Ernest was gone, but my soul whispered, what if? And then the warning, don't trust our sons. I knew in that moment that my life was no longer my own. I was standing in the middle of a nightmare I couldn't wake from, surrounded by faces I no longer recognized. That night after the funeral, I sat alone in our darkened house, clutching the phone as if it were a lifeline. The words from the unknown number echoed in my skull. I'm alive. Don't trust our sons. I tried to convince myself it was a cruel prank, the work of someone who had heard of Ernest's death and wanted to twist the knife in my grief. But deep inside, something told me it was more than that. It felt too precise, too connected to details only someone close would know. I went to Ernest's desk, the one he kept in the corner of the shop, untouched since his accident. His tools, his papers, his meticulous notes, it was all there. My hands shook as I opened the old metal box where he stored our important documents. Inside, I found the life insurance policy. It had indeed been increased 6 months earlier, from a modest $5,000 to $50,000. My breath caught. Ernest had never mentioned this to me. Why would he hide something so important, unless someone had pressured him into it? I dug deeper and found something worse, a workers' comp policy taken out just 2 months before his death. Another $15,000. I stared at the papers, the numbers blurring through my tears. My sons had known. They had talked about the insurance before Ernest's body was even cold, and now here it was, proof that money had been at the center of everything. As I sat there, my phone buzzed again. Check the bank account, see who's been moving money. I didn't sleep that night. At dawn, I dressed and went straight to the bank. Mrs. Thompson, who had known Ernest and me for decades, greeted me with kind eyes and condolences. When she brought me the account statements, I nearly dropped them. Thousands of dollars had been withdrawn over the last few months. Money I knew nothing about. Who made these withdrawals? I asked, my voice barely steady. Your husband, she said softly. He came in personally, sometimes with one of your sons, Charles, I believe. Charles! My heart turned to ice. I looked at the signatures on the slips. They looked like Ernest's, but shakier, less confident. He never signed like that. It was as if someone had forged his hand while guiding him. I pressed Mrs. Thompson. Did he look unwell? Did he say what the money was for? She hesitated. He mentioned repairs at the shop, but I never saw him in his usual spirits. He seemed pressured. I left the bank with the statements clutched to my chest, my legs weak, my mind spinning. And as if the universe wanted to confirm my darkest suspicions, another message arrived on my phone as I stepped outside. The insurance was their idea. They convinced Ernest. It was a trap. I couldn't deny it anymore. My sons had pushed Ernest into increasing his insurance. They had touched our savings. They had lied about the accident. The picture was becoming clearer, and it was darker than anything I could have imagined. Still, I needed more proof. The next day, I forced myself to walk into Ernest's shop, the place where they claimed a machine had exploded. But when I stepped inside, my stomach dropped. It was spotless. Too spotless. There were no scorch marks, no broken equipment, no evidence of fire or chaos. Every machine sat in its place, polished and intact. An explosion had never happened. At his desk, I found notes in Ernest's own handwriting. One read, "Charles insists I need more insurance. Says it's for Margot, but I don't trust his intentions." Another said Henry brought papers to sign. Claims it's to modernize the shop, but why so rushed, I don't understand. My hands shook as I opened an envelope with my name written in Ernest's familiar script. Inside was a letter, his last words to me. "My dearest Margot, if you are reading this, it means something has happened to me. In recent months, I have noticed strange changes in Charles and Henry. They are too interested in money, in insurance, in selling the house. Jasmine pressures them. Yesterday, Charles told me I should be more careful about accidents at my age. It felt like a threat. If something happens, don't trust anyone, not even our sons. I love you always." I collapsed into Ernest's chair, sobbing. He had known. He had tried to warn me. And I had been too blind, too trusting, too full of love to see it. That night, Charles came to visit me with Jasmine at his side. He carried a bottle of wine and spoke as if everything were normal. "Mom," he said smoothly, "the insurance money will come soon, $15,000. You should move into a smaller place. Henry and I can manage the money for you." I watched him closely, hiding the storm inside me. "And what if I don't want to move?" I asked. He smiled, but his eyes gleamed with something sharp. "We just want what's best for you. You can't handle finances alone at your age. It would be safer if we took care of it. Safer for them, not for me." That night, as anger and fear churned inside me, another message lit up my phone. "Go to the police station tomorrow. Ask for the accident report. There are contradictions you need to see." The next morning, I walked into the police station, clutching Ernest's letter like a shield. Sergeant O'Connell, a man who had known Ernest for years, looked puzzled when I asked about the accident. "Mrs. Hayes," he said slowly, "there's no report of an explosion at Ernest's shop. In fact, according to the hospital records, your husband didn't arrive with burn injuries from machinery. He arrived showing symptoms of methanol poisoning." Poisoning. The floor vanished beneath me. My sons hadn't just lied, they had murdered their father. I stumbled out of the police station with my heart pounding so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Poisoning. The word echoed inside me, chilling me to the core. Methanol, something deliberate, something slipped quietly into food or drink. It hadn't been an accident. It hadn't been fate. It had been planned. As I walked home, the pieces started clicking together like jagged glass, forming a picture too horrific to look at directly. The sudden pressure to sell the house, the insurance policies ballooning overnight, the withdrawals from the bank, Charles and Henry whispering with doctors instead of grieving at the hospital. And now this, the proof that Ernest had been poisoned, not injured. That evening, Henry came by with flowers. His smile was rehearsed, his voice soft, but I could see the tension around his mouth, the flicker of panic in his eyes. "How are you holding up, Mom?" he asked. I stared at him. For the first time, I truly saw him not as my son, but as a man capable of cruelty I hadn't thought possible. "I went to the police station today," I said evenly. "They have no record of an accident at your father's shop." For a fraction of a second, Henry's mask slipped. His pupils widened, his face drained of color. Then he chuckled nervously. "Mom, grief can confuse you. You're not remembering things clearly." "Don't lie to me," I whispered. "I know." He set the flowers down abruptly and left soon after, muttering something about needing rest. But on the porch, I saw him making a phone call, his voice sharp, urgent. They were panicking. Good. That night, another message arrived. "They'll come tomorrow. They'll say you're imagining things. Don't believe them. Don't eat or drink anything they offer." The next morning, my doorbell rang. Charles, Henry, and Jasmine stood there together, their faces painted with exaggerated concern. Jasmine carried a bag of pastries, Henry a thermos of coffee. "Mom, we're worried about you," Charles began in a voice so sweet it made bile rise in my throat. "The neighbors say you've been acting strangely. Doris says you've been talking to yourself, not eating properly." Lies. Doris had said no such thing. Jasmine opened the bag. We brought your favorite pastries. You need to eat. You've lost so much weight since Dad passed. I shook my head. I already had breakfast. They exchanged a look, the same conspiratorial glance I had seen at the hospital when the doctor spoke of Ernest's condition. Charles leaned closer. Mom, we've spoken with doctors. They say grief can cause paranoia in older people, especially women your age. We think it would be best if you got professional care. Professional care. A polite phrase for being locked away, silenced, declared incompetent while they took everything Ernest and I had built. Henry nodded gravely. There's a facility, a home where you'd be safe. In the meantime, we can handle the money, the house, the legal matters. You shouldn't have to worry about any of that. I felt my jaw tighten. And what if I refuse? Charles's smile hardened. Then we'll have to take legal measures. We've already spoken to Judge Miller. We have a doctor's report. It says you're suffering from paranoia and can't make rational decisions. My blood ran cold. They had gone that far. Paid off doctors. Bought false reports. My own children were preparing to strip me not only of my husband but of my freedom. I forced myself to stay calm. I need time to think, I said quietly. Of course, Jasmine purred, but not too much. For your own good. When they finally left, I collapsed in my chair, shaking. Rage and terror battled inside me, but above all, grief. These were the boys I had nursed, clothed, prayed for every night of their childhood. And now they wanted to poison me too, erase me the way they had erased their father. Later that evening, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't a short warning. It was a long message. Margot, my name is Stephen Callahan. I'm a private investigator. Ernest hired me 3 weeks before he died. He suspected Charles and Henry were planning something. He was right. I have recordings, photographs, and evidence. Meet me tomorrow at 3 p.m. at the corner cafe. Sit at the back table. I'll bring the proof. I sat frozen, staring at the glowing screen. All this time, the messages hadn't been coming from Ernest. They had been from the man Ernest himself had hired to protect me. Even in his final days, my husband had been watching over me, preparing for the storm he knew was coming. The next afternoon, I walked to the cafe with my hands trembling, my heart pounding. Every shadow on the street felt dangerous. Every stranger looked like a spy. I sat at the back table, ordered a chamomile tea, and waited. At exactly 3 o'clock, a tall man with gray hair and kind, sharp eyes approached. He carried a brown folder under his arm. Mrs. Hayes, he asked softly. I nodded, unable to speak. I'm Stephen Callahan, he said. I'm so sorry for your loss. But I promise you, your husband didn't die in vain. I have everything we need to prove the truth. Stephen slid into the seat across from me, his presence calm but charged with quiet urgency. He set the brown folder on the table and looked me in the eyes. Before I show you anything, he said gently, you need to know this will hurt. It will tear you apart. But it will also give you clarity. Are you ready? I swallowed hard, my throat dry as sand. For a moment, I wanted to run, to hide from the truth, to pretend my boys were still the children who once clung to my skirt. But I nodded. Show me. He opened the folder and pulled out a small recorder. When he pressed play, my husband's voice filled the air between us. Ernest. The sound of him nearly broke me. It was like having him back, if only for a moment. Stephen. His voice said low and steady. If something happens to me, it won't be an accident. Charles and Henry have been pressing me to increase my life insurance. Yesterday, Charles brought me papers that included clauses I didn't agree to. He said it was to protect Margot, but I don't believe him. Please keep an eye on them. Tears blurred my vision. Ernest had known. He had felt the threat closing in. Stephen's hand brushed mine, gently grounding me. There's more, he said, pressing play again. This time it wasn't Ernest. It was Charles. His voice was sharp, businesslike, dripping with calculation. No, we can't wait any longer, Charles was saying. Dad's starting to get suspicious. Yes, I already have the methanol. It's perfect. The symptoms will look like a heart attack or a stroke. By the time anyone figures it out, it'll be too late. And Mom, don't worry. Once he's gone, she'll be so broken she won't fight us. I gasped as though the words had struck me physically. My son's voice, the same voice that once asked me to sing him lullabies when storms scared him, was now planning murder. Stephen let the silence sit before he played the next recording. This time it was Henry. Everything's ready, Henry muttered to someone. Tomorrow, Charles will put the methanol in Dad's coffee. We told him it's a vitamin supplement. The old man will drink it without a second thought. Symptoms will look natural: dizziness, confusion, coma. The doctors won't suspect anything. By then, he'll be gone. I covered my mouth with both hands. The cafe around us blurred sounds, muffled as if I were underwater. My sons had spoken about Ernest's death like it was a business transaction, a simple problem to solve. My babies. My flesh and blood. How? I choked out, barely able to form the word. How could they? Stephen's face was solemn, his eyes filled with compassion. They were desperate. Charles owes $70,000 to loan sharks. Henry has gambling debts of $40,000. They saw their father's life as a payday, and they saw you as the next. From the folder, he drew out photographs. My vision sharpened despite my tears. There was Charles caught on camera leaving a hardware store with a small bottle in his hand. The date stamped 5 days before Ernest's death. Here, Stephen continued, showing me another document. This is Ernest's medical exam from 3 days before he died. Perfect health. No heart disease, no problems. His death certificate says otherwise because your sons bribed the attending doctor to falsify it. He laid out the receipts, the bank statements, every damning piece of evidence, and then he played one final recording. My heart nearly stopped as I heard both Charles and Henry together. Once Dad's gone, we need to get rid of Mom too, Charles's voice said coldly. She's fragile. No one will question it if it looks like a suicide. A grieving widow who couldn't live without her husband. The money will all be ours. Henry's voice followed, steady, terrifying. The house, the savings, the insurance, nearly $200,000 in total, will be set for life. I couldn't breathe. My vision tunneled. The room spun. My sons hadn't just killed their father. They were planning to kill me. Stephen reached across the table, steadying me with his hand. Mrs. Hayes, I know this is unbearable, but you have something powerful now, proof, enough to bring them down. I shook my head slowly in disbelief, in grief, in rage. They're my sons, I whispered. How do I go to the police and tell them my own children are murderers? Stephen's voice was steady, certain. Because they are not your sons anymore. They are criminals. And Ernest wanted you safe. He hired me to protect you. Now you have to protect yourself. If we don't act, they'll move against you. They're already preparing legal documents to have you declared mentally incompetent. Tomorrow morning at 10, they're meeting with a judge to start the process. If they succeed, you'll lose everything: your home, your freedom, maybe even your life. I sat there, frozen, my tea untouched, my heart breaking in new ways I didn't think possible. My husband had been right. My sons had been planning everything. And now justice rested on me, an old woman with shaking hands and a broken heart. Stephen leaned closer. We act tonight. We go to Sergeant O'Connell. He's honest, uncorrupted. With this evidence, they can't escape. It's time, Mrs. Hayes. It's time to end this. I closed my eyes, Ernest's face flashing in my memory. His smile, his laughter, his hand warm against mine. And I made my choice. That night, I walked into the police station with Stephen by my side, the folder clutched tightly in my arms like a shield. My legs trembled, but my resolve was unshakable. I was no longer just a grieving widow. I was a wife fighting for justice, for truth, for the man I had loved all my life. Sergeant O'Connell looked up in surprise when he saw me. His kind, weathered face softened, but his eyes sharpened as I laid the folder on his desk. Sergeant, I said, my voice firm despite the tremor in my chest. I need to file a complaint for murder. My husband Ernest Hayes was poisoned by our sons. His eyebrows shot up. Mrs. Hayes, that's a very serious accusation. Are you certain? Stephen leaned forward, his voice steady. We have proof, recordings, photographs, documents, everything you need. For the next 2 hours, we laid it all out, the audio recordings of Charles and Henry, plotting the photographs of Charles buying methanol, the falsified bank records, the medical exam, proving Ernest's health, the bribe paid to the doctor. And finally, the most damning piece of all, the recording where my sons discussed murdering me too. O'Connell sat in silence, listening, his face growing grimmer by the minute. When the last recording ended, he leaned back heavily in his chair. My God, he muttered. I've seen cruelty in my years, but this is monstrous. I sat there, gripping the arms of my chair, my heart hammering. Sergeant, I whispered, they are no longer my sons. They are killers. I will not let Ernest's death go unanswered. He nodded slowly, then turned to Stephen. We'll need to exhume the body, to confirm the methanol in his system. I clenched my fists. Do whatever you need, I want the truth uncovered no matter how painful. By the time we left the station, it was nearly midnight. The district attorney had already been called, arrest warrants authorized. At dawn, the police would move. I barely slept. I sat in my kitchen staring at Ernest's old coffee mug, the one that had once been filled with love and warmth but had become the vessel of his death. My hands shook as I remembered his final squeeze, his attempt to warn me. He had trusted me to fight for him, and I would not fail him. At 6 in the morning, my phone rang. Charles's voice came through, urgent, false. Mom, you need to come to Henry's house right away. Something terrible happened. Please hurry. I closed my eyes, steadying my voice. I'm on my way. But I didn't move. I knew it was a trap. Instead, I sat at the window watching as an hour later, police cars screamed down the street in two directions, one toward Charles's house, the other toward Henry's. My phone rang again and again. Charles, Henry, each call more frantic than the last. I let them all go unanswered. At 9 o'clock, there was a knock at my door. Sergeant O'Connell stood there, his face solemn but firm. Mrs. Hayes, it's done. Charles and Henry are in custody. They're being charged with first-degree murder and conspiracy to commit murder. My knees buckled. I gripped the doorframe, overwhelmed with relief, with grief, with a hollow ache that no justice could ever truly fill. How did they react? I managed to ask. Charles denied everything until we played the recordings, O'Connell said. Then he broke down. Henry tried to escape out the back window. We chased him for 6 blocks before he was caught. I closed my eyes and let out a long, shaking breath. Ernest could rest now. At last, the truth was no longer buried. Later that afternoon, Jasmine appeared at my door. Her mascara streaked down her cheeks, her hands clutching at mine as she begged. Please, Mrs. Hayes, you have to drop the charges. Charles isn't bad, he was just desperate. I pressured him, it's my fault too. Don't destroy your family. I pulled my hands away. The family was destroyed the moment you and my sons chose greed over love. Ernest is dead because of you. And they plan to kill me too. Don't speak to me of family. Her sobs followed her out of my house, but I felt nothing, no pity, no compassion, only a cold emptiness. 3 days later, Ernest's body was exhumed. The lab confirmed it, lethal levels of methanol, enough to blind, to damage the brain, to kill. The headlines called it the cruelest crime of the decade. Reporters swarmed our town, but I barely noticed them. All I cared about was that Ernest's death had not been in vain. The trial came swiftly. I walked into the courtroom wearing my best black dress, the same one I had worn on our wedding day so many decades ago, though now it symbolized grief, not joy. Charles and Henry entered in orange prison jumpsuits, shackled, their heads bowed. Seeing them like that pierced me, but not with pity, only with sorrow for what they had chosen to become. The prosecutor presented everything: the recordings, the bank withdrawals, the falsified documents, the photographs, the poison in Ernest's blood. When the jury listened to the recording of my sons plotting my death, a gasp of horror rippled through the courtroom. When I took the stand, my voice shook, but my words were clear. I loved my sons. I raised them with everything I had. But the men sitting there are not my sons. They are strangers. They murdered their father for money. They tried to destroy me. They are no longer family. They are killers. Charles wept silently. Henry stared at me with defiance, but his eyes shimmered with unshed tears. Too late for regret. After 6 long hours of deliberation, the jury returned. Guilty, on all counts. The judge sentenced them to life in prison, without parole, for 30 years. When those words rang out, I felt something shift inside me. For the first time since Ernest's death, I felt free. The verdict echoed in my ears long after the gavel struck. Life in prison. The courtroom buzzed with whispers, reporters scribbling furiously, neighbors shaking their heads in disbelief. I sat there in silence, hands folded in my lap, feeling a weight lift from my chest. It wasn't joy. How could there be joy when I had lost everything? It was something quieter. Relief. Ernest's death had meaning now. His truth had been heard. As Charles and Henry were led away in chains, I watched them one last time. Charles's shoulders sagged, his face pale with shame. Henry's jaw clenched, his eyes defiant. but I saw the fear beneath. My sons, the boys I had kissed goodnight, the men I had believed would carry forward Ernest's legacy were gone. What remained were hollow strangers destroyed by greed and desperation. In the days that followed, the town erupted with scandal. The newspapers called it the case of the killer sons. People I barely knew came to my door offering condolences, some bringing food, others simply holding my hand in silence. Doris, my faithful friend, cried with me on the porch. "Now Ernest can rest," she whispered. But rest didn't come quickly for me. Nights were long and heavy, filled with memories that cut me open again and again. The sound of Ernest's laugh, the way he fixed the roof with his bare hands, the evenings we spent drinking coffee and watching the sun sink into the fields. Then the image of him hooked up to machines poisoned by our own children. One week after the trial, Stephen came by. He didn't knock formally. By then he had become more than an investigator. He was a friend. He sat at the kitchen table where Ernest once read his newspaper and asked, "How do you feel?" I took a long breath, looking at Ernest's empty chair. At peace for the first time. But peace doesn't mean happiness. It means I can finally sleep without nightmares. Stephen nodded, his kind eyes soft with understanding. Ernest was smart to hire me. He knew something was wrong even if he couldn't put it into words. He wanted to protect you. "I know," I whispered. "He always did." The insurance money came through soon after, $50,000 more than Ernest and I had ever seen in our lives. I couldn't bear to keep it. It was blood money stained with betrayal, so I donated every cent to a foundation for victims of family crimes. It felt right. Ernest would have wanted it that way. My small savings were enough for me. I had never needed much. 6 months later, I received a letter. It came from prison, written in Charles's familiar hand. I sat at the table for a long time before opening it. "Mom, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I regret everything. The debts, the greed, the way I let Jasmine and Henry push me. We killed the best man who ever lived. We destroyed the family you built. I can't live with it. By the time you read this, I'll be gone. Tell Dad I'm sorry." The next day, the prison called. Charles had hanged himself in his cell. Henry suffered a breakdown soon after and was transferred to a psychiatric ward. I should have felt satisfaction, but all I felt was a hollow ache. I hadn't just lost Ernest. I had lost my sons too, not on the day of their sentencing, not on the day of the murder, but long before, when they chose money over love. Years have passed since then. I am 71 now. My hair is completely white, but my heart is steady. I still live in our little house with the tin roof, though I've painted the walls a soft yellow, Ernest's favorite color. His shop, once filled with tools, I've turned into a garden. Red roses, white carnations, sunflowers that stretch toward the light, just as he taught me to do in the darkest times. Every Sunday I take fresh flowers to his grave. I sit by the stone, close my eyes, and feel the breeze brush my skin. Sometimes I swear I hear his voice telling me he's proud. Proud that I was strong enough to face the truth even when it broke me. Proud that I fought for him, for us, for the love we built from nothing. Stephen still visits every week. We drink coffee on the porch and talk about life, about justice, about resilience. He has become my chosen family. Because family, I've learned, is not about blood. Blood can betray you. Blood can poison you. True family is made of loyalty, love, and those who stand by you when the world falls apart. Do I miss my sons? Sometimes. But not the men they became. I miss the children who once held my hand and laughed in the summer sun. Those boys died long before Ernest did. I have let them go. I share my story now because I want others to know. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the ones you love, but truth can set you free. Justice, though slow and painful, can bring peace. And even in the ashes of betrayal, there is strength to rise again. So if you are listening and you've carried wounds you thought would never heal, believe me when I say this, you are stronger than you think. You can survive the unthinkable. You can still bloom in the ruins. If Ernest were here, he'd squeeze my hand and remind me, the truth always finds a way to come out. And he was right. Thank you for listening to my story. If it touched your heart, please like, share, and subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you felt. Your support means more than you know. It reminds me that I am not alone. and neither are you.